Hi, I'm Chloe Hamman. I'm one of the insight strategists at CultureAmp, and I'm excited to facilitate our panel tonight. So the topic is HR's role in driving a culture of innovation. We've already heard through the story of BT that it's clear that innovation is vital to a company's success and ongoing competitive advantage. However, if the key to sustained innovation, rather than kind of flash in the pan moments, is ensuring that your culture is driving innovation, then it's critical to understand HR's role in this. We've already heard from Didier about what it means to be a culture-first company, and from Jamie around BT's journey through innovation. And our panel is an opportunity to bring these two concepts together. So we're going to do that through our panellists. You've already met Didier, CEO at CultureAmp. So I'd like to introduce Laura and Patrick. So would you like to just give us a quick introduction, role, company, and a bit about your story?
Yeah, sure. So Patrick Bradley, my name. Until about 2 weeks ago, I was HR Director for the consumer part of our business here in BT, which delighted to say includes BT Sport, which is a lot of fun actually to work with, but also our PlusNet business, all of our kind of consumer landline and mobile business. I did that role for about 18 months, and actually my history in BT is I was the HR Director of EE, the mobile company, when EE was purchased by BT. So that was my kind of route into the group. So by default, I've worked with two parts of the business, two of our businesses. About 2 weeks ago, I started a new role, which is leading on the sort of compensation and benefits agenda and the employee relations agenda across BT as a whole. So that's my background.
Thanks.
So I'm Laura. So I started in recruitment. So lots of people don't like me either, actually. So I started nearly 11 years ago in tech recruitment, and I worked through contract recruitment, perm recruitment, then I ran small companies as part of bigger companies, as they often are. And I started to get more and more involved with some of the teams that I worked with on their culture. And actually I started to question why I was recruiting, because some companies I would recruit for had brilliant brands, but actually when people arrived, the promise wasn't the same, and others had a really awful brand image, but they had brilliant teams. So I started to question things and say, well, why are we doing this? And kept getting told to stop question because I was a recruiter and I wasn't necessarily trusted. So I took a bit of a gamble and I started working for an employee engagement company that linked brand to engagement and said the two have to marry up, similar to what Jamie said actually in terms of perception. And then whilst I was there, my intention was always if I could learn enough to link recruitment and brand experience and culture together. And similarly then I took a risk and I quit and thought I'm going to start on my own. And I started speaking to companies and they all kept saying, no, we're not interested because you're not L&D and you're not HR and you're kind of not recruitment anymore. But I kept trying. And then I was just fortunate. One day a lovely lady at News UK said, yeah, I'll try it. So I've been there now for the last 12 months as a consultant, creating a talent programme that's seen us achieve some pretty cool things when it comes to culture and specifically diversity, actually.
Fantastic. All right. So Patrick, we started to hear from Jamie around the people aspect of change and innovation at BT Sport and HR's kind of role in this, or not HR. The people in the team's role in this. Can you tell us more about your role at BT and how you are driving or maintaining innovation in the consumer division?
Yeah, so I mean, I wanted to talk really about sort of three HR innovations, I think, which I think, I see people in the audience from the team who had much more impact in delivering than I did, so it's sort of you feel a bit ashamed presenting it yourself. But three areas of I think real innovation where we've been able to move the dial in how we deliver HR services that actually we feel quite proud of, I think, as a business. The first is in how we are using social media to drive our brand, our externally employment brand, if you like. And I think, one of the things Jamie talked about is how the perception of BT externally can be quite different to the perception to what it's actually like internally, and actually it's a much more creative, exciting business than I think necessarily people will have. I think it's the symptom of having a long kind of public sector kind of history, but actually, you know, what our teams have been able to do, and actually 2 or 3 of these that I'm going to mention are in the breakout areas afterwards, so you can go and get a little bit more detail and see it in action. But really how we've used things like the BT Sports story, how we've used people doing unusual roles in BT that people might not expect to really, in social media land, challenge people's perceptions of what it's like to work here, and actually, as a consequence, really increased our direct recruitment, and we have to rely on agencies far less. So, and actually parts of the process that we've re-engineered as well. So like we've started using virtual reality in assessment as well, as one of our tools. Now, actually part of that is just to, again, challenge people's perceptions as they come through. The other couple of quick areas to mention, I think, are how we're using gamified learning and gamification in training, which is a phrase that's been around for a little while, but we've got I think a couple of really good products that we've used both in EE and BT in how we make learning much more fun and much more engaging, much more bite-sized, particularly with our customer-facing employees who have limited time to spend on training and need to do it in bite-sized chunks. So again, there's a couple of things that is well worth having a look at there, and how again we use a social media environment to encourage others to learn. And the final one I would say is, and Consumer had a fantastic internal communications team who really, I think, pushed the boundaries on how we communicate with our employees, and you know, particularly using the fact that we have a bloody great studio in Stratford, as Jamie said, to actually broadcast internally and use the kind of the stars that we have to lead internal communications as well. So I think that's 3 areas we're particularly proud that we've pushed the boundaries in.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You sound like you've got so much going on. Is there anything you feel like you want to start doing, or you wish you could do more of in terms of innovation?
Oh, hell yes. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah, we've painted the big good picture there. I think the one thing that I've mentioned that's on my mind, and I know you talk about this, I've heard you talk about this before, is around our employee data, which I think we report on what's going on in silos, and actually it would be fantastic to be able to really group that and have common insights, you know, like, you know, how engagement drives attrition, and how you know, your attraction is improved by greater attrition. You know, linking all of those HR and business metrics to really understand what's going on, that kind of big data concept where I know some companies are doing really well, but we're not where we need to be quite on that.
Yeah, fantastic. So it's great. We've been hearing, you know, a great story about BT's journey of innovation, and it's really impressive. And I think many companies are thinking, you know, I want the secret ingredients to innovation. We're just hearing one story, but you know, Laura and Didier, do you feel that some companies are just more ripe for innovation or more ready for it?
I think it depends on the company. So
Yeah.
I get asked that a lot. It depends if they're an enterprise business. It depends if they're a public business. If they're a tech startup, absolutely. And then really, I think a lot of it comes down to the CEO or the MD, depending on the scale of the business and how much they believe in people, and then innovating.
Yeah.
I think one of the questions that innovation, collaboration, these sorts of things that are often considered to be universal truths, it's actually quite interesting to ask why. So you need to be more innovative. Why? Why do we need to be more innovative? What's the purpose of innovation in this company at this point in time with this set of problems? And I think it's partly the company, and it's also partly you need a good enough reason to need to change before anything real is going to happen. And so it goes back to the culture. I think where we've seen it work the best is when, and this is why it works in startups, is you have no choice. So you sort of look at it and you realise that you either have to be innovative or you're going to die. And that's a very catalysing process. And so I think where we've seen companies do it well, other than startups, is when they've had that opportunity to look deep inside and see something coming and believe in something that other people haven't quite got their head around yet. And that's what catalyses and drives it. So it's always, for me, is like just being innovative is kind of pointless. You have to be innovative for a reason. And it's the reason that drives everything. And hopefully it's the reason that sits at the heart of the culture.
Yeah, so a compelling reason rather than just innovation's the latest thing that we need to have for no reason. So let's dig into kind of people in innovation for a moment. So Laura, I know there's a large body of research and science out there around what it takes to, I guess, facilitate innovation. Everything from having colourful beanbags and, you know, coloured post-it notes and having fluid roles. So in your opinion, are there any specific, you know, what are some specific people, culture or environmental elements that we need to consider when it comes to innovation, if any?
So I think it's picking up on Didier's point actually. So the first thing is why, because lots of people talk about innovating, and quite often when I meet with companies that want to talk about cultural change or improving recruitment, I always ask why and what the business objectives are, and then I think it's linking it back to what your culture is currently. So you almost have to assess, so if you're a startup, like you said, it's a bit different because you can set the tone, but if you're a larger business and you've got siloed teams, then what you really need to think about is, why do we want to change? What do we see that change being, and how realistic is it that we can get there? And I don't think that's a decision that you can just make based from a top level. You have to also look at your employees and understand what drives them, and then you can design programs of innovation. So I think it's great if you've got Google-esque and you've got beanbags and you've got colourful rooms, but if your company isn't Google-esque, then it's not going to work. So I think they're nice to have, but they're building blocks once you've really started to listen to the people that work for you, figured out why they are or aren't engaged, why they are or aren't staying, how you can help them become more productive. And only then, I think, can you look at colourful rooms or anything else that follows suit.
Yeah, it's really helpful. And I think it's an important point because we don't want to read the latest HBR article on innovation and go, great, I've got the formula, and go ahead with it when it's a lot more than that. So I guess moving on from that, sort of...
Can I add one comment?
Yeah, go for it.
Chloe, so actually, Jamie, I think you said it perfectly in your thing. We have a question in our survey, which for me is like the barometer for innovation, which is, you know, are you allowed to do something even if it might not succeed? That's the fundamental thing, that like if you don't have some level of risk tolerance, innovation is very, very, very hard. And if you think about all the other pressures that are put on companies these days with all the governance regimes, all these new things coming in that companies have to do, that's often the hardest part, is actually just creating that space for people to be able to experiment and try. And it doesn't have to come from the Googles. Like I was actually thinking as you were saying this, because I think when we're upstairs, you're talking about Bristol. I reckon one of the most innovative companies in the world, and it comes from my previous life, is Aardman Animation. And like they're as old school as you can get. They're like almost the opposite of Google in many ways, but incredibly innovative, incredible sense of craft, and incredibly strong culture. So it can come from anywhere. It doesn't have to be a tech startup. And in fact, if you look at the news these days, a lot of the tech startups aren't nearly as innovative as you think they are. You know, they're just a lot of money getting pummeled into a business proposition at turbo pace.
I think that's the point. So I think people model themselves on Google because they think Google is the cool company to be. And it's not necessarily, if that's not intrinsically what your company is about or what their values are based on. So I work specifically in tech, so I can only really talk about tech. But quite often when I speak to tech companies, and typically at a certain level, they are all white males past a certain age. And then when you turn around and say, I know, we're going to make everybody happy because we're going to have beers on a Friday night and talk about what we've done, and then we're going to sit on beanbags, and then we're going to come together and measure how happy we are. They're not really that bothered about that. So I think the Google point is very much you have to decide what culture you want to set, and then based on that you design your innovation.
And these companies very quickly become the companies of yesterday rather than the companies of tomorrow, and you know, you can see it in that sector with, I won't mention it, the example I'm thinking of, but you know, you quickly becomes part of the status quo, I think, and you just got to really try and keep that culture alive. Otherwise it's very easy to become part of the status quo.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. And I think so. Moving on, I guess, to the reason we're all here is we know it's not coloured post-it notes or beanbags, and that takes to create a culture of innovation. But what is HR's role in driving a culture of innovation? And perhaps, Patrick, from your personal experience to start.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd probably draw out two things that I feel are really important. I think the first is, Didier mentioned in his presentation, is diversity, because actually in a company like BT that has a long history, we have a lot of tenure, people have been here a long time, you can end up with a kind of a group think on issues, and you kind of end up with, okay, well, that's the way we've done it, that's the way we've always done it. So actually that external stimulus, I think, bringing in diversity of thought and different perspectives, that actually people have tried things in different ways at different companies, and I think really encouraging that, again, diversity not from a perspective of gender diversity, although that's important too, but from that thought diversity, I think is critical. And the second thing I think is inspiration, and actually where people have evidence in the company of where it's happened and things have changed and things have improved and it's gone well. And I'm shameless, but we use BT Sport all the time within BT as a cultural change engine, and actually it's been a really important part of our journey to change the company, I think. So that would be my two.
Laura, you want to take it?
Yeah, so I think I agree with Jamie, actually. I think things go wrong quite often when you look at HR and then you look at technology, or you look at commercial, and you separate everybody out, and then they go into different rooms and they talk about it, and then they come at it from their own angle, and then they objectify what they need to achieve, and then it becomes competitive. And I see that quite often, and where I've seen it work really well, Imogen is here somewhere, so she's EE, so she's just joined, I guess, the wider group of BT. Her and I work together at News UK, and actually Imogen's HR, I look after talent, which is a slightly separate function, but we never looked at each other like that. Both of us joined the leadership team meetings every week, so we could talk about what challenges faced them, what challenges faced us, and then we could talk about things from a tech perspective, a money perspective, a people perspective. So for me, it's probably breaking down the barriers and having HR in the business, and almost to a point eradicating, please don't hate me for saying it, but the term HR, and just having it as one team. It's just you happen to have different skills. Some of those are people, some of those are business, and you do really good things together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the role of HR in innovation and I guess just in culture in general, I often think, there's this sort of weird idea that culture is HR's problem rather than everybody's problem, and it should be. Culture is something that should be throughout an organisation. But if I do think about what HR's specific role, I think two things come to mind for me, and this is from talking to people in companies and trying to kind of get at when it works, why does it work? And I think the first one is amplification. When you think about culture, people, innovation, it's really hard stuff. Like, you're trying to get people to change behaviour, you're trying to get things to change, you're really dealing with some of the hardest problems in business. And if people are talented and they have the time, they'll get there. But if you think about how long it takes someone to go from never having managed someone to being a really good manager, to learn some of the lessons that Jamie was sharing before, that could easily take 10, 15 years of personal experience. There's this old line that good judgment is what you get from experience, but experience is what you get from bad judgment. There's a lot of it that needs to go on. What I think truly great HR and the various aspects of HR do is they amplify that and they speed it up. And you see companies that are really good at it, people come to those companies because they know that they'll in 5 years learn what they'll learn in 10 years somewhere else. They'll become a better manager, they'll become a better recruiter, they'll become a better facilitator. And I think part of that's skills, part of that's the technique, but I think this idea of like BT Sport being a change agent, I think the true power and the power that I often try and encourage people in HR to really grab is storytelling. Like, you're a chief storyteller in the company. You're the person that goes and finds that situation and explains it to somebody else, not just to tell them how to do it, but to make them want to do it. That's actually the most important part, and I think that's what HR does when it does it really well, is it goes and finds those little pieces in the company and takes them to the people that need to hear it so they can get somewhere faster than they otherwise would. If you can do that, it's an incredibly powerful thing.
Yeah, I think definitely the power of storytelling is phenomenal. Perhaps this is all also reshaping, how we see HR's role as well, because I guarantee probably I come from a background in HR and I certainly didn't learn to be a storyteller, so it's not what you get taught, so it's rethinking that. I think, taking a step back, so I was looking at some research by CRPD, Deloitte and PageUp, and they found that while around 80% of HR professionals do feel they have an important role to play in driving innovation, less than a third of them believe that they're actually kind of delivering in this role. So I'm keen to hear from Patrick and Didier and Laura if you have a comment around what do you think is holding HR back from actually stepping into this?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably confidence is the one thing I think that holds HR teams back. I think, you know, it takes a bit like innovation. It takes some guts to do it, and it's kind of breaking the mold, and it's trying to move things in a direction that sometimes people don't quite expect you to take them, and I think that takes some guts and some confidence. So that probably, if I have one choice, that would be it.
I think investment. I think lots of times, to your point earlier, when companies have to look at budgets and then they have to look at projections for the next year or the year after, quite often the place they focus last is people, which typically means HR teams don't get the investment that they need. And certainly most of the people I've worked with in HR are amazing. It's just that quite often they're under-resourced or they haven't had the budget to invest in people in the way that they want to, so they have amazing ideas, but they just don't have the capacity. So I think my biggest thing would be, if you really want to have sort of people and culture first, you need to invest in your people teams, and you need to give HR the opportunity to be able to do the job that they can do or should do.
Yeah, I've probably spoken enough, but
right.
I think on that idea of investment, and data is such an interesting part, it's about being able to take people on a journey. So yes, HR struggles with budget. HR comes up against engineering or sales or marketing or whatever, and they lose every single time. And so, you know, I'm not a big believer in functional models that way anyway, but it comes down to this program or that program. And so that's the challenge, which is how do you use data? How do you use research? I mean, the great thing about the world of HR at the moment is we're learning so much about the brain, we're learning so much about mental well-being, we're learning so much about positive psychology that we can influence in the workplace. How do we use that to educate executives, to educate CEOs, to educate boards on why this stuff matters? And that's a skill. It's a skill that other parts of the company have spent decades getting good at. But Stephanie, who's here from our company, and I were talking about this last night. She ran sales teams for a very long time. And she's sort of like, I want to teach HR people how to win against me. And that's basically the goal. You've got to go and put a case that's stronger than anybody else's. And I think with what we know about the world we're in right now, you should be able to. So that's what this is all about. And this is what I'm interested in talking to everybody about after this. How do we do that?
That's great. And I think, leading off on that, finally, if moving forward, if you were going to encourage HR professionals or people in the room here tonight to leave and wake up tomorrow and do one thing differently to help drive a culture of innovation at their company, what would it be?
Yeah, I think just have the confidence to do it. I think you expressed it really well in terms of you've got to fight for those budgets, you've got to fight for that investment, and you've got to believe that what you're doing will make more difference than investing in other parts of the business. And but it does, sometimes. So I think having that confidence to do it.
I think look for the reasons why you can do it rather than why you can't. And certainly some of the companies I've worked with where we haven't had budget, we've run proof of concepts. And if we can prove based on that one small proof of concept that it works, then we can get a bit of investment to do something else, and then we can get a little bit more. But yeah, ask why not, I think.
Yeah. I think so.
I'd tell people to wake up and read Joseph Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Faces. He wrote the book on comparative mythology. And you read it and it reminds you, the work that you do in HR is legendary work. I mean, that's the goal. You're actually trying to take people on a journey. And I think sometimes we just forget how powerful and important it can be. And that's the thing you've got to embrace. That's the thing you've got to take to work with you. That's the thing that you've got to pour everything you have into. So, Joseph Campbell, Hero with 1,000 Faces.
Excellent.
I spent 13 years in Hollywood, so I got whacked over the head with it until I know it all.
We should all go and buy it. Thank you. Thanks so much, Patrick, Laura and Didier. I'm certainly inspired, and thank you for sharing your experience and your stories with us. So definitely got lots to take away with. So thank you. I'll just say that.